Hi, this is Khalil Guliwala. Welcome to another episode of BIPOC Manager podcast. In today's episode, I'm super excited to have Saloua Benkhouya with us. She's Vice President, Impact Investing and Private Equity at Fund de Solidarity FTQ. She's a proud mother of three and has accumulated 20 years of international experience as an executive in financial services. Saloua has had the privilege of living and working in several countries, which shaped her global perspective and awareness, including Dubai, where I was born and raised. She's a long-term investor and is passionate about backing female underrepresented founders. She holds an MBA and a BAc in mathematics from McGill University. She is a co-founder of podcast, just Femme Innovation, and she enjoys time with her family and friends, running, reading, and traveling. Hello, glad to have you as a guest today.
Hi, Khalil. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Tristan. When I think about you and your life, I see you as a person who keeps raising their hand, from being this new lycée in school, putting your hand up, running for student council, putting your hand up for work opportunities. I'm sure, what kind of advice do you give to somebody who's struggling with raising their hand or putting their hand up?
Yeah. I mean, before giving advice to people, I usually try to understand like why are they not comfortable putting their hands up. I think understanding the why it helps with giving ideas or sharing ideas. And usually what I tell people is what's the alternative? Like when you decide not to raise your hand, what's the alternative of staying or keeping status quo? Like think about that. Are you happy with the alternative? Because most people are not happy with the alternative, but they're shy or they're hesitant to put their hand up. They usually want to grow, but they're not sure if they should raise their hand for that opportunity. They usually want to progress, but they're not sure to progress to what is the next opportunity. So I usually talk about the alternative. And when you talk about the alternatives, it makes people kind of realize or take stock of what is what is it that is bothering them, what is it that currently they're not completely satisfied with, and you start talking about areas of growth and opportunities, and it encourages people. The other thing that you say to people is, okay, well, now that you have that perspective, what happens if you raise your hands, and what happens if you actually get what you're wanting to get, or get that promotion, or get that next job, or get that opportunity? What happens? And so most people are like, well, what if I get it and I'm not up for it? What if I get it and I fail? And I'm just like, well, what if you never raise your hand and never know, right? Like 10 years from now, would you want to look back and say, I had an opportunity, but I really didn't raise my hand to explore it? What if I had? And so most people start projecting, 10 years, 5 years down the line, and kind of come around to saying, okay, well, I guess I'll try, because the downside is not that bad. And if I fail or don't get it, at least I know, and I'll learn from it. So that's usually what I do. And sometimes, if people have kids, I say to them, what if this was your child? What would you tell them? And that puts them in a posture of a parent. And most people want to be encouraging to their parents and to their children. And so it gives another perspective. So those are some of the tools that I use.
I think it's that framework, right? I can see the mathematician, I can see that scientific background. Like think about your downside, think about the upside, and just
Yeah.
act on it as well.
And I have to say that not like I haven't come across a lot of male colleagues or peers or mentees in my career that are too afraid of raising their hand. This happens mostly for females, for women, right? Like I have a lot of women right surrounding their hesitate or question, or don't feel ready, or don't feel it's the right timing. And sometimes it happened to myself as well. I've had situations where at times in my career I'm like, oh, was is this the right time for me to do this? And I mean, often I do take that leap of faith and jump. But this is a more common event with women.
Okay. And in that case, maybe one of the things that when you talk about women, I think is the idea where like almost like the idea of balancing work and family life. So can you talk a bit more about that? Because I imagine that might play an aspect when it comes to maybe what I would call almost the raising your hand at the risk analysis.
Yeah. I mean, there's no such a thing as having a perfect balance. There are going to be times where you're going to be more focused on family because that's your priority. If you have a sick child, or if you have, someone in your family who's unwell that you need to take care of. So there are going to be times where you have to prioritize, and it's going to have to be family. And there will be times in your life where perhaps you have more bandwidth and you can prioritize your job or your career, whether you're going for a promotion or you have a particular opportunity that you're super excited about, and you're able to prioritize your career. So it's really it's evolving your priorities. I mean, at the core, you must know what are your priorities in life. So I think that doesn't change, but it evolves in terms of where you are in your career and where you are in your life. As a manager, I guess, it's very important to be organized. I think that's where it starts for me. And I tell people, there's a saying that give something to someone who's very busy. If you want something done, give it to someone, to the busiest person, and you'll find time to get it done. And that saying is really true, even as a manager and a parent, because it starts with getting organized. Once you get organized, you start seeing where you can create efficiencies in your schedule, in your life. And it's the 80-20 rule as well, and not everything has to be done 100% perfectly. And so it's finding ways of, if this is really important to me and I want to do it, how do I carve out time to do it? Where else do I need to pull from or pull back to be able to create that capacity? So it's all doable, not necessarily at the same time, not necessarily all the time, but it's about finding that trying to find that I guess balance depending on your priorities at the time.
Yeah, I think that's a keyword, balance, because that's always such a tricky, because it's so personal. As you said, like you would ask people what their why is, and with that, you help establish them a framework of whether they should take a leap or not.
Right.
And so maybe on that sense, one of the things that you keep talking about is the ability to identify and create opportunities. We've talked a little bit briefly about what you've done. I know that you're working in a pharma company because you had love science, but you wanted to do business. You're an opportunity to work in deal advisory. You went to Dubai. You've done all these amazing things because you've identified what you want to create these opportunities. Can you talk a little bit more of kind of maybe a framework of what goes through your mind when you're kind of looking at these opportunities, but also perhaps judging between opportunities?
Yeah. So I think earlier in your career, it's very hard to have a very good view of where the opportunities out there. So I think what's key is really spend a lot of time networking and spend a lot of time asking people, what was one event or one opportunity that really made a difference in their career? So trying to understand how things played out for other people that you respect or admire and things like that. And you build on that and you develop almost this data room of events that when you come across, when you're facing something similar or some situation, you're able to kind of play back and go like, oh yeah, I remember that conversation with that executive who had something similar that happened to them. And so that is so key, to be able to leverage other people's experiences and paths. But having said that, every career path is very different, right? So it's not going to play out exactly the same way for everybody. So it's important to spend the time to reflect on what is it that you want to achieve, to constantly refresh your mind on your goals, on your objectives, because if you lose track of what is your goal and your objective, it's really hard to kind of be on the lookout for those opportunities. So it's almost like you want to have that vision board in front of you, I would say even on a daily basis, to kind of have a reminder of where is it that I'm working towards, right? And that also evolves with time. And sometimes, every year it changes or some things remain the same. But as you're taking stock and reflecting on where is it that you're going and where you're working towards, when you are in an environment, when you are having conversations, whether in a company or industry peers, you have to be able to connect those dots, right? And to me, I think one of the key differentiators in people that succeed in their career are the people that are very good at networking, are not afraid to ask for people's feedback. What is it they could have done better in this instance, and very, very much capable of reflecting on their own career and career steps, but also are able to visualize, where am I going? 3 years from now, where do I see myself? How do I get there, and work backwards, right? So yes, sometimes you're going to be presented with opportunities, and you going to have to be able to judge and compare the opportunities. And sometimes some opportunities seem more obvious, right? Like, so this is a more calculated opportunity, and therefore I should take this path. And sometimes other opportunities may seem more stretched, or you're not quite sure what the role will actually look like. It's a bit less concrete. But some of those opportunities where you have less information, and where you might be stepping out of your comfort zone, and you're like, oh, this is not exactly, I'm not really sure what this really means, could be great opportunities for you to grow as an individual. So I tell people, don't discount an opportunity just because you're not quite sure what it actually means or what it leads to. Ask as many questions as you want, but sometimes you also have to be comfortable taking some risk, because in stretch opportunities, there's not going to be 20 of those stretch opportunities. There might be 20 of those very similar track record path where everybody's following a certain progression and everybody goes from A to B to C. But there's going to be those opportunities where you go from A to D, and there's not going to be that many of them. The how, the path is not very clear, but you're going to have to be able to kind of trust yourself, trust the path, ask a lot of questions, or as many questions as you need to be able to assess the risk. But if you don't take those risks, it's very hard to make those significant jumps in your career. At least that's my experience.
Yeah, so one thing I'm getting from you is the distinction between risk and uncertainty. Uncertainty is almost information about the environment, but risk is the upside and downside. And it seems like you're trying to say,
correct,
want to decouple these two things.
Correct.
Right. And then kind of work through it. That's interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so at the same time, you've talked about networking, you talk about like building relationships. That's been very key for you in your career. Any sort of top tips or strategies that you suggest for anybody who's trying to network better or create a network?
Yeah, I mean, networking it doesn't have to be seen as a homework. People see it as like this big chore. Networking is really being curious about people and asking questions and getting to know people and genuinely wanting to learn about people. And so, whether it's in part of your daily commute in the metro, or in the airport, or talking to your neighbors, talking to your parents' neighbors, like networking happens in all sorts of forms, of course. And there's the formal networking events, if you're in part of business school, attending all those events and things like that. So to me, there's like a natural organic networking that you can do, and that some people enjoy doing that and others don't. You don't have to force yourself, but it's nice to kind of show curiosity and learn about people, and that helps you sometimes in the most unexpected ways, developing a network outside of your field, of people that that you can go back to if you need some information or advice and things like that. And there is the more deliberate, calculated networking, whereas, okay, I want to go in field X and I don't know anyone in field X. So how do I go about developing a network in that field? And to me, that is something that has to be, you work on that like you work on a project. You identify people that are thought leaders in that area. You start following them. You listen to what they're saying, read anything that they post. And then you identify people that are within your circle that work or that have relations in that network, and you connect with them or reach out to have coffees and have a very systemic approach about how you go about building a network in a specific field. So there are two different types of networking. They're both important, because it's not just building a network in your area of expertise or your field. I think it's important to have a pretty broad network in life.
Amazing stuff. Thank you so much for sharing that. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you like to mention, anything like to share?
Yeah, I mean, you asked me the question about raising your hand and taking risks and those questions. I mean, in general, when people come to me for advice and they're saying, well, like, I'm not sure what should be my next goal or my next objective. And I say, like, in life, it's really good to dream. As children, we all have big dreams, and as adults, somehow we stop having those dreams. And so I tell people, when you're thinking of those objectives, think of them as dreams. And if your dreams don't scare you, this is a quote that Richard Branson, that I love from Richard Branson, is if your dreams don't scare you, they're not big enough, and if your objectives don't scare you a bit, they're not stretch enough. And so that's sort of my that's my advice that I give to people when they come to me for a recommendation.
Oh, it's amazing. So, listen, as we wrap up, in terms of anybody who'd want to get in touch with you or follow you, what's the best way they could do that?
I guess I'm most active on LinkedIn, and so that's the platform that I'm most active on. I'm also, active on Instagram, but I would say, between those two platforms, that's the best way to connect.
Amazing. So, thank you so much for being a guest today.
Thank you for having me.